Good.
Morning, everyone. This is the November 18th meeting of the Nantucket Historical Commission. Let me begin by just checking in of who's here. David Silver.
Here.
Thank you. Clement Durkis.
Here.
And Tom's not here. Is Georgia here?
Yes.
Oh, there
I'm
you
here.
are, Georgia. Hi. Sandwiched in the middle. Mickey Rowland.
Here.
Abby DeMolina.
Here.
And do we have Susan with us today? Susan Handy?
No, I don't see her.
And then our staff liaison, Holly Backus.
Present.
Thank you. Ken, thank you for joining. And Hillary, thank you for joining.
Hey.
Hi.
What about us? Yeah, we MPT
talk
here, Mary and Rita.
Hey, you guys, thank you for joining. It's such a weird screen over there. Okay, so let's begin with public comment. Are there any?
I have a public comment.
Hillary, please go ahead.
Thank you. So the select board met on Wednesday and discussed the advisory boards. The HDC made a request to have the other advisory boards, aside from the sign commission, the neighborhood advisory boards appointed. And there was testimony from the staff and the director that everything was working fine as is. And ultimately, the board decided in a 3-2 vote not to appoint the advisory boards at this time and to defer the decision pending further investigation of the historic district, how well it was working, what problems the advisory boards were solving. I don't remember exactly all the things they wanted to discuss, but it seemed to me that this question of the advisory boards is one that this commission has opined about in the past. They're members of the advisory board on this commission, and the functioning and stewardship of the historic district, including any potential revisions to the historic district, is a matter of great concern to this commission. So I thought it would be helpful to the select board. I just want to make sure everybody knew about the discussion, because there's a lot of different places and different information to follow. And I thought it would be appropriate and helpful to the select board if this commission might want to have a special meeting to discuss, what the select board might be looking for in terms of review and guidance, work, take feedback directly from staff on that. I just want to make the suggestion for the future.
Thank you for bringing that up, Hillary. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to follow it recently. We've written our concerns and our support for the advisory boards. We agree with the HDC that they're an integral part of them being able to do their job the best they can. The way I understood it was that they wanted the system back the way it was, and that they were just going to go through the channels to make that legal as soon as possible. And so that's where I left it. So I'm surprised that that there isn't the same support in the town. Has anyone else followed this? Mickey?
Yeah, I didn't watch it live, but I watched the tape later on, and it's a pretty long, involved discussion about the I don't think there's any discussion about the need for the advisory boards. It's just, I think it all revolves around, does the town want to pay the staff or does the staff have the time to deal with the advisory boards? And it's not a small amount of time. I realize that. But you know, I personally feel that it would be beneficial to have it under the town's jurisdiction. What I plan to do is to kind of work with my advisory group, Historic Structures, and kind of put a letter together to the select board. I don't know when it's going to come up on their agenda again, but I'd like to get a letter to them explaining our view of it, because they didn't hear from any of the advisory boards specifically, and you know, give them more information, because I think there are positives. You know, it's kind of easier now. It's more work for me, but I think there are definitely positives for the town and the system to have it controlled by the town and the HDC specifically. So that's, you know, those are my thoughts regarding this.
Vicky, that seems like a good idea. Ken?
Just, I listened to the entire thing. I think there was in fact, more basic critical issue that was concerning the select board, and that was whether or not the way that the HDC is structured in terms of how it functions relative to the different kinds of applications that come before it. And what I thought I heard was that they wanted to have somebody take a look at, and maybe you should structure the HDC into having it sort of 3 areas of application, for instance, one for consents, one for fences or the simplest stuff, and then the one for the more detailed stuff. And that if you then had it set up that way, you be able to have separate meetings to move this stuff through clearly, easily, as opposed to having to be wait now where you have a fence, but you still have to wait your turn until you come up on the overall thing. So I thought that there was some discussion that they maybe even thought about maybe hiring somebody to help them look at how that should be structured as a way to be able to speed up the process, and to utilize the reports coming from these subcommittees, because I don't think there was any objection to the subcommittees. I think there was a sense of how best to be able to make it so it's really most efficient use of your time as a subcommittee, and then also of the HDC.
I just wondered if this group might want to have a meeting just to discuss this, because you know, this is as the historical commission, there's a lot of knowledge and familiarity with the HDC, and this group has a little more time to deal with policy and make recommendations. It's really not it's not under the purview of the select board to direct the HDC. Certainly it's appropriate for them to be concerned and to encourage the efficient functioning of the HDC, and the town manager is responsible directly for the support of the HDC because it's a town board. But I think that I just suggest maybe it would be fruitful to have a convening about the topic as a special meeting. And I wondered if the chair would agree to that or not want to go there.
I do agree. Are there any other comments about this from the commissioners?
Very different comment, not a commission.
Well,
There
I
was a
think
comment.
I'm Clement. I used to serve on the SAB, and we are continuing to meet when there is Sconset when there are Sconset applications. We do not have the support of the staff, obviously, so it's harder for our chair, as Mickey says, to glean through the whole process to come up with what we need to review and we do still make our comments. So we are functioning. It's not as efficient as it was, and it doesn't go through the town employees, but I think it was a valuable part of the HDC. Now, so is the question, I did not watch the select board meeting, but I just heard that all the advisory boards were not reelected, not reappointed, reconstituted. So I would, if this is a question of redoing the whole HDC, as Ken says, maybe this commission should get involved with how thinking about if we're talking about reconstituting the HDC. We should be involved in that. So
Mary,
Yeah, thanks, Angus. I did watch the whole thing, and I think it was interesting, and I was glad to see that the end result was, the HTC needs to be studied. We were also at the 2-hour-long HTC meeting yesterday, which was a discussion of best practices. Stephen Welsh has really been working on putting together some more systems in place. I think the combination of those two things is really thinking about structures, because it might be systems. I think about structures I guess it is structures in every sense of the word. I agree that, we're lucky we still have a community where people are very passionate and want to deliver their comments, public comments or organized comments. But I think whether it's going to lie in the town or it's going to lie with a neighborhood group or whatever the answer is going to be, I just worry that the way things are set up right now is working, but if any one thing were to change, if like something happened to Mickey, or if Ray said, well, I don't want to hear these comments, how do we make sure that this outlives the people who are at the table today, and whatever the solution is. Anyway, I'm just very, very much looking forward to the idea of somebody studying the HDC and coming back with some independent best practices.
No,
I-
Mr. Chair, if I may, I just wanted to mention that, while, I think this is a good topic, this did come up as a public comment and not vetted on the agenda. So, I would just caution, technically, you shouldn't be deliberating on public comment.
Thank you for the reminder. And I think we could probably just simplify this by having a special meeting where we can discuss this further. So I think that there's certainly plenty to discuss, not just about the advisory boards, but the structure of the HDC. As far as timing or, where and when that could happen. Any suggestions?
Why don't we just put it on the agenda and use it as a item for our next meeting? I mean, we could meet, we're not going to meet next week, but we could meet in 2 weeks.
I feel like all these things are unfortunately pressing as we head into the holidays where everyone's busier. This is a major issue, and I feel like I feel like the HDC needs to have its greatest strengths and work the best it can to preserve what we all care about. So I feel like this is a pressing issue. How do the commissioners feel about meeting in a couple of weeks?
It's all right with me. I agree.
I'm on board. It's okay with me. Yeah, obviously depends on the day and the time.
Yeah.
So how is this time and day, but 2 weeks from now? So that's
No, Angus, you cannot do that. That is our board meeting. I'm sorry.
That's your board meeting.
Ken has.
How
to
about
be
December
very
9th?
Works for me.
So what day are we looking at there?
Friday, December 9th.
So that would be the week before our next meeting.
That's the National Park Service, isn't
Mhm.
So I mean, would the afternoon of the 2nd work for everyone?
Second?
That's
No.
stroll. I think you're gonna have a hard time.
Yeah, that is cool. Yeah, I don't think that's a good.
And Mr. Chair, I do want to mention that the select board left it open.
Yeah.
They basically are holding the whole topic till a date certain. So there really isn't like, oh my gosh, it's going to be next week or the following week or whatever. So I just wanted to mention that.
Well, also, when all this happened with losing the town support for the advisory boards, the idea was we need to get them up and running next week, or and it's been a while now. So that's why I'm feeling a bit of urgency with it. Is anything open for that week of the 6th? Wednesday, Thursday?
I'm available anytime that week. I'll be in Nantucket too.
Yeah, no, that's too busy for me. We got other stuff.
The
we're working on.
NHA has a conference that week about that Marty Hilton is putting on for the
That I'm-
National Park Service
Hmm,
about historic structures and sea level rise. That's the 3-day conference. that
That's the 6th through 9th, isn't it? And then the public is
6th through
invited on
What
the.
about the week before? It's just before that Friday, the 2nd, which seems to have
That's the school
conflict.
week.
Could we do?
What about
December
Thursday the
1st
1st?
or-
I can't do the 1st.
Or even the
What a
30th,
doodle.
Wednesday,
Wednesday.
the 30th.
I could possibly.
I could do that.
All the time.
Wednesdays are tough for me because of the select board hearings on Wednesdays.
So, yeah, and Tuesdays and Thursdays are hard for you.
The 9th.
Most of
How
it.
is everyone else for that Wednesday, the 30th?
I'm fine.
Do that.
Okay,
That's all right.
Let's
Fine.
tentatively
Unrelated.
shoot
That
for
was-
that. And if we find a better day, we can figure that out.
I have a
thinking
meeting
the
at
morning
11:30.
again?
Yeah,
I
10,
can't do the morning. I can't do that morning.
and I have a meeting at 11:30.
Okay, so
Monthly meeting.
afternoon,
1 o'clock?
Yeah.
1 o'clock.
Well,
I could do
afternoon.
1 o'clock.
1 o'clock?
Yeah, I could do that.
November.
Okay. Let's do 1 o'clock on the 30th.
Thanks. I've been following this for a long time and collecting a lot of information, so I'd be happy to share that in advance. So you guys can decide if it's useful to present.
Thank you, Hillary. Are there any other public comments before we move on? Seeing none, I'll go on to approval of the minutes, but I don't believe we have minutes to approve, do we?
So I'm gonna be circulating the minutes the weekend after each meeting to all the commissioners so that everyone has enough time to review it. So that's gonna be a change in the system there, if that's okay with everybody.
That sounds great, David. Thank you.
Okay, so what I'll do is I'll send October and November to folks this weekend, and we can possibly approve at the special meeting.
Great, thanks. Holly, were you raising your hand or was that an acknowledgement?
I was given a thumbs up. I think. that's
Okay. All right. So Holly, actually, let's move on to the surveying update.
Yes, so the current survey, so I want to let you know, basically the forms themselves for fish lots are going to be finalized by the end of this month. They obviously took into the commission's comments, they took in MHC's comments. The last thing I was told is that they were asking MHC for the numericals. So as you're aware, if you have an existing HDC survey, there's a NAN dot, whatever,
Yeah.
numerical. And of course, anything that had a survey previously, those numbers will stay the same. They'll just add on the Form B in addition to what was done in the 80s. Anything new is going to have a new numerical. I know Mary is very familiar with that process. They literally give them they'll tell them we need X amount of numbers, and they give them to them. So that'll be really cool once that's formulated. And I think that's going to be likewise with the effort that Sconset Trust is also doing. So the numerical systems will, be the thing. And then just for the benefit of the commission and the public, once the MHC is satisfied with the surveys and they have their numbers and they're put into their Macris database, they will also be available on the on the town's website with the MHC's inventory layer there that you click on, and you'll see new triangles. And again, our survey effort is to have more triangles, whether it's a form A, B, C, D, E, H. So there's that. As far as the survey plan goes, I've been working diligently with PAL recently on finalizing a little bit more of the descriptions, helping them with the action items. This is pretty cool. I think the community is going to be really, really happy. I'm very giddy about it. I've even mentioned it to one of the select board members last night, and our the town's appreciation for employees that happened. We haven't had in 2 years because of COVID. And I'm just really, really excited. So they've been working really hard on it, and we're going to have a document that's going to help us moving forward. I would recommend that if the commissioners haven't done this in the past, take a look at MHC's website about the survey forms and just get yourself familiarized with some of the types of surveys. Because remember, it's not just buildings. It's not, there's Form Bs, but there's Form As for areas. There's also Form H's for parks and landscapes and our cemeteries. So those are the type of nitty gritty and granular details that I was talking with Pal on what else we're gonna have within the survey effort. That would also include objects. So anything that's town owned, that's an object, like Meridian stones, like the Civil War monument, very, very detailed. And just, again, just really, really excited. So that's where we're at. We're gonna be receiving I should be receiving another draft soon, and then I think that's going to be probably the beginning of next month. So I might have more of another update on that at our special meeting. So I'll keep you posted. Pre-application has been submitted. That was sent out about a week and a half ago. The deadline was on the 14th, so they got it well in advance. And obviously, I'm looking forward to hear where we stand on that if we get selected. And I think we usually hear around December-ish on whether or not we get accepted to submit for a full application. But really, really excited. So yes, you should all be happy of this SCLG effort.
Thank you, Holly. I know I'm personally interested in seeing where things are with the draft of the survey plan. And if you can share where you are or the next iteration with the commissioners, I think everyone would probably be interested in seeing where we are before it's all done and
Oh, yeah,
dusted.
absolutely. So what Ginny has told me is she's going to be sending a draft for everybody's review. And what she said is that, you know, it's pretty much going to be a draft format. And of course, if there's any, you know, granular things that need changing, that would be at that time that they would not, you know, say, oh, no, we're not going to be doing any changes, which is great. You know, obviously plans are fluid. Plans are something that we can always, you know, have addressed. But obviously, if there's any errors that need to be taken care of, she will help us with that. So not a problem. As soon as I receive it, it sounds like I should be receiving it, whether it's today or next week. But as soon as I do, I'll send it off to the commission.
Thanks so much.
Mhm.
Do we have Patrick Reed with us today?
Should be. I haven't heard anything other. He told me yesterday he would be here. I don't see him in the queue, and I didn't know if he's here today on Nantucket or if he was going to be zooming in. But yeah,
If
he
there's a
should.
way to check on that, meanwhile, I guess we could go on to the next item on the agenda.
Sounds good.
So we'll move on to the update of the revolving loan fund. And thank you all so much for your patience with this latest update and presentation. We've been short on our past couple of meeting times.
Well, if I could start with that.
Please go ahead, Georgia.
I just wanted to introduce the idea and then let Abby and David speak on it. The idea is that, as you all remember, that we might create, or there might be created, a revolving loan fund originally conceived for people who have insufficient income to properly maintain their historic houses. And in doing that, we started a while ago. David dug out some potential and a list of potential recipients, just for curiosity's sake. There are quite a lot of them. And then since then, we have spoken with the Preservation Trust and with the CPC about getting this started. The fund would take the form of a, well, that is a question. We'd like, in other cities, it's taken the form of an independent 501c3, which would itself require some legal work in getting it set up, and then a lot of legal work year to year in maintaining it. Our hope is that perhaps we could fold this under an existing town or existing 501c3 organization. We haven't gotten to that point yet, but that would be an ideal situation. Then we'd spare ourselves that money. And the idea also is that we would involve a local bank to be able to make relatively small loans, relatively being bigger than not the mainland loans that are usually typically 25 or 35,000, but something that's more in line with what Nantucket costs are. And so I think we need to, we're updating our conversations with both the bank and nonprofits. And what I think I'd like to do is hand this over first to David, who can talk a little bit about the potential recipients and people he's spoken to, and then to Abby to talk about how it's all going to get financed.
If that's, do you want to go first, Abby? I feel like you
Doesn't
might
matter.
have
The
more
order really doesn't matter. Do you want to
substantive
go first, Abby?
Sure, I can
Let's
go.
let Abby go first.
So as Georgia pointed out, we're still definitely trying to figure out the funding mechanism. I think we're looking at a couple of different ways for us to get the initial seed funding. The goal, as Georgia mentioned, is we want to do an application next fall with CPC. We've been working closely with Ken, who's on our meeting, understanding how we can structure our application and trying to figure out the best way so that the goal would be to ask for an allocation from the CPC in the fall. In the meantime, we're still doing the research and due diligence, understanding, as Georgia mentioned, exactly what types of projects we'd be funding and what they look like, what would be a typical cost. So we need to build up some of the data to understand so we can analyze and say, we probably anticipate the average project being, in this range, what types of projects we're thinking. Also, we've met with Mary and a bunch of the people from NPT, but also understanding who would be the types of contractors we would look, because I think the goal is when someone comes to and asks us, we want to be able to be as helpful as possible and provide them all the resources. So we would want to be able to give them a list of contractors we know that have done these types of projects. Again, understanding what the type of cost would be, and then encompassing all of that prior to our application. So there's still a lot of research we're doing. So that's on the funding piece. I'm also trying to chase down the Vineyard Wind Mitigation Fund just to understand it. That's more of a wish list item, but still, again, we're just trying to figure out what all of our options are. So, David, I don't know.
Yeah,
You want to add?
I'm not sure if there's much more of an update, but we essentially the plan for the next 6 to 8 months as we kind of prep the application is to continue to engage our partners at the bank and the nonprofits, understanding better so that we can explain to you guys ultimately kind of the nitty gritty and the granular components of the application, the NHC's role, the role of each one of our partners, and everybody understanding and coming to consensus on that. So those are the conversations that we're hoping to have before the holidays to kind of double down and affirm the commitments from the partners. And then hopefully we have a kind of an abstract conceptual, if you will, of what we're doing and what we need to do. And I'd like to share that with the commission and get that possibly on the special meeting agenda so that we can just kind of, or even just circulate it via email for you to review and provide comments. So we really want the commissioners' input here. And if you guys have questions for us right now, please fire away.
I should add that this is a really useful project, I think, in our minds. In other towns, as well as on Nantucket, there have been a number of people who feel either forced to sell or forced to fix their houses in inappropriate ways. We're talking about external features, by the way, not anything internally. And we're talking about a bunch of there are a bunch of other legal issues, in other situations, the town has taken an easement on an exchange for this loan. We're not sure whether an easement is actually legally necessary, whether we could do something with less onerous such as a tradesman's lien or something like that, that would keep life simpler for everybody. So there are a number of open issues, and I would be very happy to have the commissioners' input and any other thoughts, at the special meeting, if possible, at the next meeting. And I think both Abby and David have done a fabulous job putting this all together, and Abby with her bank contacts and getting some money together, or some people who are interested in making some money available for this purpose.
Someday.
Makes them look good.
Mhm.
And David for helping figure out what the CPC process would be, and thank you, Ken, for helping with that. And with any luck, this is a project that, as Holly knows, has been on my mind for over 20 years, and I'd be very happy to have this start to happen. Well, just incidentally, I did meet with somebody named Michelle Kolb, who was going to come to one of our meetings, who is interested in setting up some sort of historical preservation asset salvage. And that might possibly play into this at some point, in terms of whether we could reuse windows or doors or doorsteps or something of that sort. Mary is nodding. She's looking like she knows something to contribute here.
Yeah. She's been interested in that. I know Sarah Noel McLean has also been interested.
Yeah, well, she's a good person to have behind it too.
Yeah.
Georgia, that's a great
Yeah.
point. I think the only thing that we also talked about, and this is really further down the line, but I think our goal is once we get everything in, our ducks in a row, if you will, we'd love to have some sort of, publication
Mhm.
so that people.
We want to have a press announcement about this.
Yeah.
When we're
yeah.
a little closer to having it achieved, I think it'll be really good to get some good publicity about it.
Yeah, so that's something that we also thought about is highlighting all the partnerships that have gone into place. So that's definitely at the end, but that was George's idea, so I don't want anyone else to take credit.
I thought it was yours.
It was yours. But anyway, I don't know if there's any other thoughts, but as I said, there's a lot of research still to come.
Thank you all. Are there, Mickey, go ahead.
Yeah, I maybe this came up before and I've just forgotten, but is the revolving loan fund, is it a loan, or is it sort of a forgivable gift of financing?
Oh, it's a loan.
Yeah, it'd be a loan
Yeah.
or a grant.
It's a loan
That's what I
at a lower interest rate and for a distinct period of time. In other localities in Massachusetts, it's been for 5 or 8 or 10 years. And as I said, there've been accompanying easements on it. Easements out here, easements in general are a pain in the neck to get, pardon my informality. And they're a lot to administer and maintain on the part of the nonprofit. So we would be hoping to find a way in which we could do this by means of a tradesman's lien, which is less onerous and yet just as efficient, especially if we're only talking about a 5-year loan or an 8-year loan.
Tom,
Yeah, I'm curious as to who determines whether or not the applicant is really in need of the financial support? Is it the town, the bank, or the CPC, or who? To cut
I
down
don't
on
know.
a lot of the
Have
red
we
tape
addressed that
paperwork.
directly? I don't know that we have addressed that directly. The bank usually does a credit report on an applicant. In other towns, that's the way it's been done, so that the applicant is credit worthy. And I guess in that context, there's an indication of income and available assets.
But that's only if the bank is the one lending the money. I think we've been exploring different options that wouldn't have the bank lending money directly. So I don't know if we would
I think
do.
you might have to look at, is there a way that what you're doing could go towards the goal of maintaining the year-round housing stock? And if you're able to do that, you might be able to work with a monitoring agent like Housing Nantucket. I'm, as somebody who was audited by the state to buy my house via the Housing Assistance Corp, like they have these things set up where they can figure out how much money you really have and if you're a good person to lend to. And
That's a good point. So I think that makes sense, is we probably want to plug into one of the existing kind of structures. If they have that kind of monitoring, then we would look to leverage that.
yeah.
And
I think too, like, there's a CDP on Cape Cod where they do provide these sorts of loans to people so that they can update houses that they've been in for a long time, things like that. So I think there's existing
systems you can work from.
Hillary, you have a comment?
Oh, yeah, I just had a question of, is this going to have a need-based component, or is it just going to be anyone? It's going to be more focused on financing and credit.
It's going to be focused, it's going to be need-based initially. And I can't see it changing. The whole point is to help people who otherwise can't afford to fix their houses properly. And again, we should mention it's also external elements of the house, not internal. But
Yeah.
what constitutes need basis may vary with Nantucket,
Mhm.
you know, as opposed to the world at large, but it is intended to be need based, at least at the beginning.
I would also suggest that you might look into the consideration of having it be, so there's need based on your income level, and then there's need based on your ability to actually get financing. And I think some of these restoration projects are very difficult to finance because they're expensive and they're not like, they don't appraise the same way. Abby could speak to this a lot with probably more precision, but I know from speaking with some developers and also just looking at historic homes there, the financing can be strange and it can be difficult to put together financing packages. So you might, I don't know, I'm speculating, but you actually might find that you get take up of this loan. It really, you want the loan, the fund to be used, right? So you get take up and you want to make sure that the people you lend to don't default because that will deplete the loan. So you might find that you get take up from people doing restorations or just people renovating historic homes that might be less inclined to do the historic renovation at the extra expense, etc., but would be enticed by this financing vehicle. So, and it might actually help with the take up and establishment with credit-worthy people who will pay it back. So that's just a thought about how to approach the need, define need.
Well, I think we're going to have to pilot it, but I mean, a lot of the data on microloans actually shows that low and moderate income people pay back at higher rates than the average person. So I don't know if we would necessarily be worried about the credit worthiness of those people, but I think we could take it into account. But I think the idea would be, let's test it and use the data and see, you know, we could see if we, let's say, start with our, you know, LMI, because we had discussed as a group talking about going to, you know, elder services, some of those groups. I know David had an initial group, like, I think we can go there and then see the interest level. And then obviously if we don't see the level of interest we're anticipating, we can obviously widen the net. But I think the thought was to kind of start there and then see. And then obviously if, you know, people are really interested or a lot of people, you know, who aren't in that group want to be a part of it, then we can obviously expand it out too.
Possibly.
Yeah, and that's what I was getting at, is that if you find that there's a lot of demand from people who actually don't have financial need, but want to access the financing because of cash flow reasons or their investment model, that I was just suggesting that that be included and that not restricting it to need-based if you found there was big demand elsewhere, which is something you'll discover over time.
Yeah.
Any other comments or questions?
Well, I really wanted to thank both Abby and David, who have done a huge amount of legwork on this, and you, Ken, for helping coach us in part of it to get the whole thing underway.
It's been a team effort.
Thank you, Georgia.
Yeah, thank you.
I thank you all involved. And when we look at the agenda for that next meeting, are you thinking that you'll have something that you'll want to present then, that you would want feedback from us? Or
We're working on a draft of the abstract.
Yeah.
We need to
It's close.
review it. We're finalizing. We're going to send it to you. So we probably should have it for the special meeting. I think.
Midweek next week.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. It looks like we have Patrick Reed with us. Thank you for joining.
is here, Mr. Chair.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, thanks for having me and thanks for shifting the agenda around. That oversight is mine. I had this on my calendar at 1 p.m., but thanks to Holly, we were able to around here.
All
So,
good, trust me, I understand.
well, I think as I understand it, you wanted sort of a general update of transportation planning, what my role is, and I put together a short presentation. It includes a little bit of what's been presented previously at the select board with some updated information as well in here, as well as a little bit about my role. So I'm going to go ahead and share the slide if that's okay. Holly,
Go ahead.
you
Yep.
can enable me.
Yep.
Okay,
Good
let's
have
try
full
it.
control. There we go.
Are we all good?
We are good. We just need
All
to
right,
put
perfect.
it in a full view.
Go to display settings and switch it, yeah. Well, yeah.
Let's try this one.
Oh, yep.
Is that good?
There you go. Yep.
All right, perfect. All right, so quick agenda. What I'll do is I'll give you an overview of the regional transportation planning process, go over a couple selected non-motorist projects that I'm kind of functioning as the main point of contact on, talk a little bit about when to be involved, depending on the type of project it is, when you can kind of make sure that your voice is heard. That's important to us. We're all trying to achieve the same thing here, I think. And then talk a little bit about my role in technical assistance to the town of Nantucket. So I get asked a lot about sort of, do I work for the town or do I work for the NP and EDC? I'm actually an employee of the NP and EDC, and in that role, I do provide technical assistance to the town, but my main charge is really facilitating and maintaining the town's 3C transportation process as continuing, comprehensive, and cooperative transportation planning process. What this process is it's sort of collaboration between the state, the federal government, and a local government through a regional body. Now, Nantucket obviously is very unique. We're one region and one town, but for comparison perspective, most of the regions in the state of Massachusetts, there's a couple different municipalities included in there. And sort of what the region does is it acts as a way to funnel federal aid and sometimes state aid down to municipal government. So in this role, I prepare the long-range transportation plan. This is a transportation plan that's prepared every 4 to 5 years, depending on the current federal legislation for typically related to air quality. Right now, it previously had been 5 years. We're thinking it's going to be 4 years and 5 years in the future, excuse me, rather than 4, just related to our air quality attainment status. But typically you can expect this to be updated every 4 to 5 years. It is a document that identifies candidate projects that could potentially be used to receive our vehicles for federal aid, essentially. So if we have a project that we feel strongly about and are looking to use some of our obligation authority, so the federal assistance that's passed down through the region, it has to be in this document. This is a financially constrained document. It has a long-term vision. So not everything that gets put in these documents and these long-range transportation plans actually gets realized, but some things do. You can think of it as a policy statement and preparation for what's called the Transportation Improvement Program. Your transportation improvement program is sort of a shorter view. It's 5 years, fiscally constrained. And what happens with this document is that we add projects to it as we move them forward and expect them to be good candidates to receive federal aid and sometimes state aid. So you can think of those as the two like budget oriented documents that look at what the town might be doing for capital projects in the future. It's not comprehensive of everything that the town is doing, right? So if there's a project that is not receiving state or federal aid that's just going through the town's capital process, you wouldn't see that in these documents. Sometimes local projects are included just for statements of, what's hoped for, just to kind of keep the information in there. But generally, these are really focused on sort of the larger capital projects that are federal aid or state aid eligible. I also facilitate the Unified Planning Work Program for the region. So what this is, you'll probably hear me refer to it as UPWP. Sorry, I'm one of those acronym guys. I'll try to not do that in case if it comes up. UPWP, that's what it is. This is basically the work program for the year. So any sort of task that I have to take on, I have to go ahead and budget hours to it. So essentially, like, I'll give you a couple examples. My preparation of the long-range transportation plan, which will be kicking off this upcoming year. We have to dedicate a couple hours to that. Also, any kind of studies that the town undertakes, technical assistance that I provide to the town, it has to be included and documented in the UPWP. And with that, it gives the state and the feds an idea of what we plan to do with the assistance that they provide us on the operations and personnel side. The capital projects that are included in the TIP, they get funneled down into the state transportation improvement program, and then also their capital investment program. And that's on the state side. So they need us to kind of facilitate our end of the bargain so they can make sure that their documentation is in order as well at the state level. So that's sort of the brief overview of my role. A couple projects that I can focus on with you all are listed here. I'll be functioning as the point of contact for a couple different path projects, and I've been working to support the DPW on a few additional projects here. So I'll be the main point of contact for the Wawinit Side Path. This is a bike path project between the Gatehouse and then Pulpus, the intersection of Pulpus and Wawinit. And then also I'll be looking at Orange Street ped bike improvements, continuing on with the work that's been done previously. And on my end, we'll also be looking at Tom Nevers, Somerset, as well as a Newtown Side Path. So when I use the word side path here, it's essentially the same as a multi-use path or a shared use path. These are all basic acronyms, synonyms that you hear in transportation planning. I like to use the word side path because I think it's a nice, easy word to say. It also kind of gets at this idea that we're facilitating travel for multiple users, bikers, pedestrians, people with strollers, things like that. For that Newtown Side Path, I do have a note here that the town is sort of facilitating procurement right now, and I'm kind of figuring out what my role will be with the town as that process progresses. But I will be providing an update on 1 and 2 at this meeting, as well as 1, 2, and 3 on the DPW side, which are Surfside Road area improvements. Actually, you probably followed the select board's work on that. It's the water main extension project that will also result in roadway improvements, and the town will be having a public meeting on that on the 8th, which I'd encourage you all to attend if you're interested. But focusing more so on 2 and 3 here, the Milestone Roadside Path, as well as pedestrian improvements to Sparks, Williams, and Pleasant. There are a couple other things in the hopper. There are a lot of transportation projects open, so many that we can't possibly tackle them all at once, but it's good to know what's in the pipeline. So down, you'll also see Amelia Drive is on our radar, Wynn Street. We know that has been of interest to folks as well, facilitating paving of that. And then the Mill Hill Connector I'll touch upon in this meeting. So jumping into some details about this, the Wawinit Road Side Path, why is this sort of number 1 on the list right now? And I should say these priorities don't reflect what's in our LRTP. It's sort of just my jumping into the role and seeing what's open and what needs action a little bit more quickly. We have federal land access program grant award money for this path project. In 2016, we were awarded some money for design. You can see it's 283,000, I think 70 with a 20% match there. And then in 2018, we were awarded another $1 million to advance construction up to Pacamo. That's important to note here. This is a little atypical. Typically, you are awarded design funding, you go ahead and design something, and then you move into the phase to kind of look where your resources can come from for construction funding. So it's a little atypical in that, we've got construction funding when we don't necessarily have an actual design done yet. So I just call that out because I've gotten a couple questions from folks in the community. Where's the design? I want to see the design. There isn't one. There isn't even a conceptual design yet. It's just we have these funds available to us. In 2022, because my predecessor had dipped into the pot for construction funding, he said, this program is not very competitive. Let's jump in again, see what we can get. We applied for another 800 or so thousand. And because of the updated federal legislation for surface transportation, the bill bipartisan infrastructure legislation a couple of years ago, there's no local match required now. So if we're awarded this, we won't have to do 20%. So again, no construction estimate here because we don't have any design, but part of my role is to develop these sort of back of the envelope cost estimates so we can have a forecast about what's going on in the future. I'm thinking this will probably cost around 4.85 million for the whole project. It's a pretty complex project. It could be more expensive than that because the environmental needs that are there. So there'd be some mitigation of wetlands, any kind of impact avoidance of wetlands. We'd have to figure out the costs associated with that. It is a future tip candidate. So as I showed you earlier, this project's in our previous LRTP. And so once we're ready and we move that past that design phase, we can move it into the tip. Typically, you do not program a project on your tip until you have a 25% design done. And you've also gone through a review process with MassDOT to satisfy their design requirements. So this project will likely be phased once it gets to that construction side of things, just based on my best guess about costs. So the first phase would likely be up to Pocomo. Current status on it, we're working on a memorandum of agreement with Federal Highway. We had a discussion recently, a couple weeks ago, just about the schedule, which has changed a little bit based on just their sort of needs and resources internally. They are the designers for the project. So we're kind of on their timeline. But the thing that I did kind of emphasize with them is that ideally we'd be doing any kind of public outreach in the spring, or at a period where, you know, we're not just kind of at the tail end of the winter. We want to do that when people are here. There is a project website. You can go and check it out. We do have a couple neighbors advocating for this project. Just earlier this week, I actually met with a neighbor who's had some concerns about the project. It's the first time I heard some concerns about it, but definitely good to hear people are interested and engaged, want to know what's going on. There would probably be easements required along the northeast side. So anytime that's the case, we'll have to obviously engage butters once we get to that side of things. And once we figure out the MOA, I'm hoping to document all the public engagement touch points with Federal Highway. So that way we just know when when we're going to be able to collect comments. NEPA will probably be, well, NEPA process is required for any federal aid project, but my sense is because of the wetlands, it will not be a categorical exclusion. So we'll definitely have some significant touch points with this particular project. I think this is the map that confused people. I showed this at a select board meeting and folks immediately contacted me afterwards and said, I want to know the design. Again, there is no design. This is just supposed to be a conceptual diagram here to show you the complexities of the project, because there are wetlands right around, they're shown in the hatched marks, and then where the first phase would be. So the complete project would take you all the way up to the gatehouse. Oh, sorry, I should back up. Note the orientation to fit everything. I had to shift it a little bit. But the first phase of the project up to the gatehouse, the full project up to the gatehouse in the first phase, you can see is Pulpus to Pocomo. It's that purple line there. Yeah, but definitely nothing has been designed yet. So in terms of where the project would go specifically on which side of the road hasn't been determined. My best sense, probably northeast side would be easier. Could be the case that in the alternatives that are developed for NEPA, there are places where there are crossings. They could potentially develop an alternative with some shoulder usage. You know, that will come at that stage. We just haven't gotten there yet. All right, the next project I'll tell you a little bit about is Orange Street. This is often referred to in previous documents as the in-town bike path system. You'll recall a couple, maybe about 6-7 years ago now, the town finished that work to connect a path through Goose Pond. So this would be an extension of that, essentially. So number 2 is thinking about this high volume segment of Orange Street for pedestrians and bicyclists where walking and biking really isn't ideal today. There was a previous contract with VHB in 2018. We have some money left on that contract. We've been rescoping the project. The idea here would be to focus on getting a safe connection for peds and bikes past that link where Marine Home Center is and our Island Home, that area over there, past the Rotary. And I'll show you another project in a minute that ultimately fits with this one to kind of create a really safe network to some of the past points east. But that would be the goal of the project, right? To improve walking and biking along that roadway. This project will not be simple, and it will probably, the design of it, I'm assuming, is going to take multiple years just because it will require likely coordination with utilities. And we'll obviously have to coordinate with the property owners in that area as well. There's 2 things going on here. It's a very, very challenging segment. There's just a lot going on. It's a main truck route out of town. There's utilities that are overhead. There's just not a lot of space. Yet at the same end of things, we know that the pavement markings that were put in are great, but they're still not the best for biking in terms of safety because you're jumping in and out of lanes. It's a little confusing for vehicles in terms of what a bicyclist behavior, what they're expected to do. So safety is of the utmost importance. And then the last thing I would say here is that it's a very high volume segment because people who are leaving town who aren't familiar with Nantucket, who want to get out to, say Pulpus, the bike path on Pulpus, they see this as the route that is adjacent to the shore. From like a wayfinding perspective and a behavior perspective, it just makes sense to travel in that vicinity. And so it is, and the big data that we have from Strava Metro suggests that it is a very high volume segment for bicyclists. So that's one of the things that is important when thinking about the value of continuing to look at this and thinking about how we can improve it. Still scoping it. Nothing is designed similar to the other project, but we'll obviously include public engagement opportunities. I sort of believe this project scale would require some federal and state assistance. And so once we get to a point where we have some kind of a design, we'd think about programming it, but we're just not even close yet. And I think there's a lot of work to be done. You may have heard that the land bank has been looking at a connection through the creeks, sort of a raised connection through there with I shouldn't speak for them because I don't know the full plan, but some pedestrian walkways behind the properties that are there. And, we view that as a value. I think that's an excellent project to pursue for pedestrians. It sounds like it would be a great experience in the environment, but from a direct connection in terms of getting people out to points east, we didn't feel like it was an either or. I think our office, when we talked with the land bank and Remain, who had worked on that connection previously as well, in terms of a study, we kind of felt like it wasn't an either or, but instead an and, because we think they both have value. So Milestone Road side path extension. This project proposes a side path between Monomoy Road and the Pulpus Bike Path, or Milestone Connector. This one's being headed up by the DPW. There are preliminary plans complete, and we're working with MassDOT related to safety at Pulpus and Milestone. So what's happening is essentially in the design process, we're looking at our future permitting, and we started our coordination with MassDOT because Milestone is a state road, and they basically told us that they want to see something done to the intersection of Pulpus and Milestone to make it safer, because crossing it is not ideal. So without any crossing improvements to Pulpus and Milestone, we assume that this path project would cost around $610,000. But it's more likely going to cost 1.2, 1.3 million if we have to do intersection improvements in order to permit it. So we're still figuring that sort of process out with the state right now, working with them to discuss our options, and then also thinking about maybe a phased approach so we can get some of the bike path extension done. So we'll have some different options over the next few months to kind of suss over and determine a path forward. So I think this kind of shows you the bigger area and all of the different projects that I discussed for that Orange Street and Milestone area. So you can kind of see that in red, that Creeks path that I mentioned that is being contemplated by others. Plus isn't directly involved in that, and MP and EDC is not directly involved in that. But the blue hashed line here is the Orange Street project that we would be looking at to facilitate safe access from the end of that stub at Goose Pond, and where the sort of path starts on the land bank's property. I don't know if you can see my cursor here, but heading points east, then you get to Milestone, and you have that extension project that would take you to the Pulpus side path. The idea here is one safe, continuous connection on the north side of the roadway. This would negate the need to cross the Coffin Rotary. And so that's really important, right? Because that's kind of a challenging intersection from a congestion perspective, but also a safety perspective. And so avoiding it and finding a way that people can get out points east without having to cross is something that we feel is really important. I see a question here. I'll probably keep moving. We can jump through questions at the end. That might be the easiest, just to kind of keep it moving. So on the Sparks Williams Pleasant improvements, this is also a DPW project. Wanted to note that There were some funds associated with this, not nearly enough in terms of facilitating everything that you see on the right-hand side of the screen, which is the previous project's limits. Those funds have since expired, so town staff, as well as myself, I supported through my technical assistance task in the UPWP grant application for the town for Complete Streets funds in early October 2022. One thing to know about this project, I've been told that you may have reviewed this before. We are thinking about chopping this up a little bit and rescoping it with our contractor just to make it more manageable. If you look at what you see on the right, it's a large project, right? The idea previously in concept was to provide a shared use path on Sparks Avenue, a sidewalk on Williams Lane, and then between Five Corners and Sparks Avenue, sidewalk improvements on Pleasant Street. I think what we've determined is that this is just a little bit too much to bite off at once. Also, there are some ideas about how to improve the side path on Sparks Avenue that would make the project more complex. And so the idea right now would be to focus on Pleasant Street and Williams, providing a sidewalk on Williams and then sidewalk improvements on Pleasant Street. So we have a design contract with Beta Group right now. It's about 90,000. And we do have public engagement included in scope, but right now I'm supporting the DPW to kind of rethink about how they move forward with this one, and it will likely involve revising the scope a little bit to just focus on that Pleasant Street segment. Future pending. You remember a couple slides back, there were 3 different buckets. This kind of fell on the future and pending bucket. I put it on here because it's a project that from my initial start last March with the town, I knew it was the highest priority in the long range transportation plan. And I knew that the town had actually had design plans to move this forward. But in that interim period between when my predecessor left and when I started, there were conversations with the land bank of the town about the property there, and the land bank is moved forward and taking that property, and they're interested in sort of creating a public park. And in meeting with them, rather than pushing something really quickly just to get a connection here, it seemed like the right move was to think about how to best integrate a path into their park. And so they're taking this project on. We've kind of handed it off over to them so they can design it the way they would like. They have an early concept sketch. You see it here. There are some things that we've discussed in this early concept, like sort of rounding out this turn. So if you're on a bike, you don't have to make a 90-degree turn. But generally, I think we feel like it's going in a good direction here. The idea is to kind of get further west, and eventually the town would be interested in trying to figure out how to get a safe bike connection out to the pass, like on Milk Street and Nantucket. But this is sort of one leg of that. So I'll take a break there and just ask if anyone has any questions before I get into this when to get involved section.
Thank you for that, Patrick.
I had a question.
Yes, Abby.
Hi, Patrick. Thank you so much. This is really helpful and really interesting. I just had a quick question. When you were talking in the beginning about the long-range transportation plan and air quality, I was wondering, sorry, it's like way at the beginning. Do you talk about like emissions and any of those types of goals? Is that any part, like, is that a part of it? And I just was curious to know a little bit more about that.
Definitely. I am not an expert in any means in terms by any means in terms of the federal air quality legislation, but my understanding of it, and again, I think it would be best for someone who knows the ins and outs of that to probably provide you a little bit more information. If you're interested, I can do some research on it. But essentially what this is that Massachusetts has a goal for air quality. And a determination is made whether or not different regions are in compliance with that goal. So are they attaining their goal, or are they non-attainment, or there's also a sort of a category called maintenance. Right now, as I understand it, the whole of the state is now in attainment with their goal. And so that's why the long range transportation plan doesn't need to be updated as frequently. But the idea here is that projects that are in the LRTP are supposed to be ones that do support and kind of emphasize a path forward in terms of sustainability. So you see this in a couple different ways. You think about projects that are congestion reducing projects, because when you're sitting in traffic, the idea is your vehicle is emitting more garbage into the air. So that's not a good thing. So any kind of congestion mitigation oriented project, you'll find those quite frequently on the LRTP. So the town right now has, or I guess I should say the region, I'm confusing myself. The region right now has a number of roundabout plans that are in its previous LRTP, which sort of get to that idea of reducing congestion. And then you'll also see some path projects or other projects that support sustainable modes of transportation.
Yeah, that was more where I was going with it, like, because obviously I saw your focus is a lot of those path projects, which by encouraging sustainable transportation is less, destructive to the environment and more connected to our goal, obviously, of preserving the historic lands that we have here. So I was just a little curious about that, but thank you. This is super helpful.
Did anyone else have a comment before Patrick continues?
I had a comment that was actually unrelated to this, and it really precedes Patrick's tenure, but perhaps he could consider it. When we were first constituted as a historical commission, one of the early things we did, Patrick, was a review of the milestone, the new signs that were put up on Milestone. This was probably in about 2019, early 2019. And there was a lot of controversy over them at the time. Things have sort of tempers and temperatures have died down somewhat, but there's still an awful lot of extra signs on Milestone Road that that in a lot of people's local opinion, there need not be. And I'm wondering if there's any room for revisiting that issue. There are, for example, excess signs saying there's a pedestrian crosswalk. You'll have 2 or 3 signs saying, here's the pedestrian crosswalk coming. And there are pedestrians who cross there, albeit extremely rarely, but it seems on, the numbers of signs that refer to things that are either not needed or unnecessary were really objectionable to us in early 2019. It was a done deal by the time we came on the scene. We did issue a report about it, which indicated how many of those signs had been added and our opinion about which ones were needed and not. And I know this whole thing may be subsumed under an issue relating to whether we're going to expand Milestone Road at some point. But at this point, it really is, as somebody who lives in Sconset, it's very objectionable to have twice the number of signs that this little state road used to have, and also have them be extremely bright. So when you drive past them at night, and I'm sure this is a mass dot requirement, when you drive past them at night, they're very distracting. And they're when you've got your headlights on and your highlights on, your higher headlights on, they're extremely distracting when you're to a driver. So I wonder if there's any room for reconsidering any of that at this stage, or once they're up, are they up for good in the absence of vandalism, which we would hate to suggest, of course.
Well, I'd have to do a little homework on the history of it, because I don't particularly, I couldn't tell you I know the whole story about the signage and the decision for signage on Milestone Road. But you are correct, it is state layout. So what the town can do is relatively limited. It's just not within our jurisdiction. They determine what signage and markings are appropriate and safe. I will tell you that the designers are probably putting these signs in based on best practices. There is guidance. It's called the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, MUTCD. It provides guidance about which signs are appropriate when, where, and obviously engineering discretion plays into that when someone puts something up. But yeah, I'd have to do a little bit of history on it and kind of take a look at what you're saying might not be ideal. I know there is a preference to do these reflective signs these days, just based on a safety need. The town is, nation as a whole is very engaged in this concept of Vision Zero and reducing traffic fatalities and deaths and serious injuries. And so I think it might be a tough sell if there is a safety benefit to remove some signage. But that being said, I think it's important to kind of consider what's there, take a look at it, and determine whether or not it is, fulfilling its intended purpose. I think that's something that's a good question to ask. But yeah, apologies that I don't know the whole backstory and history on it.
No, it was before your time, and we can send you at least our report on that, which was fairly exhaustive, even though we were late to the scene as well. But I appreciate your taking a look at that. And also the last question would be, those standards that are suggested presumably have minimal application to relatively rural areas, or is that not considered? I mean, we are such a very rural area with such a relatively undeveloped amount of traffic, that it seems like if standards are relating to major suburbs, or they just wouldn't be applicable across the board. There should be some room for discretion. But that, you would know that. Are they applicable to all sizes of communities, even very rural ones?
There are general standards, right? So specific states can amend the MUTCD, and they have their own rules that show slight amendments to the MUTCD for their own discretion. But you'll see in there sometimes that there are specifics related to application of particular signs based on context. But generally, it's a document that's viewed, this is the best practice. It's kind of viewed as like a starting point for any kind of application of pavement markings or signage. And if you take a look through it too, you'll see that there are locations where they have a couple examples of typical applications. And once you become familiar with those typical applications, you see them out pretty frequently in the world, mimicking what's in the book. And so I would say that the engineer's discretion plays a large role, but the engineer also is the one who's responsible for ensuring the safety of people who are using a facility. And so, they want to make a choice that they feel like is safe and is going to have the best outcomes for people. Their decision-making framework is more oriented typically to safety than it would be to aesthetics.
That was clear. Thank you.
Georgia, thanks for bringing that up. Patrick, when you're looking into that, I'd also see what effects or concessions are made for a historic district, which the whole island is. Aesthetically, they're not pleasing, but as Georgia points out, I would say more than distracting, that they, for me, they really inhibit my vision of, like, I can't see beyond the glow of the sign. So if there were a person there or a deer more often, you're blinded by the sign, so you can't really see what was there. And after traveling the road for 40 years, it seemed to work very well, and then it didn't. So I thank you for bringing that up, Georgia.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested in taking a look at it. I do want to manage expectations because I do think it's important to be upfront. The town will have little control over what happens on that roadway because it is state layout. You can provide comments. You can probably contact folks at the state, and I can help facilitate connections to the extent possible. But my sense is, in terms of decision making, it's not something that I'm going to be able to affect directly. I think.
As much as it may not be your forte, it's definitely not ours. So any help is helpful. Thank you. Unless anyone has further comments, Patrick, do you want to continue with your presentation?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I just wanted to include a little bit here about when to get involved. Typically, I am on the side of projects that are less local and more likely to be oriented to have state or federal aid. And all of those projects, just as a federal requirement, have to go through NEPA. There's Section 106. The process is dependent on the agency. Most of the projects that I would be working on would be going through FHWA. And so we'd be coordinating with MassDOT and Federal Highway on the NEPA process for any project. But if you're not familiar with this process, I just wanted to give you a little bit of an overview. A categorical exclusion, this is something like, say we wanted to put a bike rack in, we talked to folks in town, said, hey, we're going to use some federal aid on a bike rack or a bunch of bike racks or something like that. I just use that example because it's one that I'm familiar with that would be very, very minimal in terms of considered impact, right? And so that categorical exclusion, you fill out the paperwork for NEPA, and that wouldn't have as large or robust as a public process. That doesn't mean that a public process shouldn't happen. So the intent here is just to kind of let you know on the formal side, that's what you're basically filling out paperwork, but on the actual sort of engagement side, our office would obviously be intending to talk to folks in town to make sure things are desirable and wanted, because I don't want to spend money or spend the region's money putting something in that is going to cause controversy and just get taken out later. It's not a good use of anyone's time, and it's not a good use of anyone's resources. So collaboration is key. For more complex projects, there's what's called an environmental assessment. So this is done when you have a project that may have some sort of environmental impact, or the environmental impact is not known. So you have to do what's called an environmental assessment. It basically documents a series of alternatives that you could look at. And with that, you would look at the environmental impact of each alternative. There are public coordination touch points, because the whole island is historic. In most cases, you would be a cooperating agency, so you'd be helping with the process in terms of figuring out, what participation is needed when we're looking at alternatives, which are beneficial, which could be tweaked to be more in line with the historic character of Nantucket, which are no-nos, things like that. For very, very complex projects, you advance into environmental impact statement. Again, here you'd be a cooperating agency. We'd have to file a notice of intent for scoping with the public. So that just lets the general public know, here's what we plan to do. We're planning to think about, let's just say it's a bike path project. We're planning to think about this very, very long bike path project, which is going to go through a series of wetlands. That's what we're doing. So there's the scoping part that has public outreach. Then there's draft EIS, or an environmental impact statement. So that is sort of like the draft version. We define the purpose and need, which is saying, here's why we think we need to do this project. Here are some alternatives that could be done to achieve the purpose and need. Here's what we think about each alternative. And in some cases, there'll be a preferred alternative already that will, the group who's cooperating on the draft EIS will have identified. If that is the case, by law, we have to state it. And we talk about the impacts and effects of that preferred alternative. That draft EIS is reviewed by all cooperating agencies, and then we receive comments and input. Those comments and input are reviewed, and then we go ahead and draft a final environmental impact statement and move forward to a record of decision. Now, these are the general steps. NEPA is very, very complex. And again, I mentioned it sort of depends on the agency that you're working with to kind of shape the process. But the point here is that there are numerous touch points, and the idea is to really facilitate cooperation between people who want to move things forward in town. So that being said, there are also local projects that happen in town without state or federal aid. And really, the idea here is good coordination. There are public meetings. We'd encourage you to get involved with any public meeting. Obviously, you can send comments to me if I'm the point of contact on a particular project. If the DPW is a point of contact, you'd obviously want to send comments to the DPW. Coordination with your staff liaison is key. Holly is excellent. She's going to help make sure that, any kind of input that you have gets to me or gets to Steve over at the DPW or wherever else it might need to go. But you can also feel free to correspond with your decision-making bodies as well. I think, it's important to kind of make your voice heard. And honestly, it helps to have it up front because that helps with the design process later on. So you'll notice in this Wilwinette project that I mentioned earlier, I'm working on the MOA with Federal Highway right now. One of the things that I'm working to do is try to front load some of our public engagement. So that way we don't get too far into design and have to kind of undo things on the design process. It just makes sense for everybody to kind of make sure that those conversations happen early and happen often. Couple other small things I just wanted you to be aware of. I do perform technical assistance to the town. Recently, that's more been in line with paid parking and freight, although I do also support the bicycle and pedestrian advisory group as well as traffic safety work group. So the town had asked me a couple months back to put together sort of a list of decision points for a potential paid parking program. So I did do that. When I perform that kind of technical assistance, I usually try to refrain from making a recommendation. I'm very clear, this is what's been asked. Here's what's being provided. Here are the decision points that you select board would have to make in order to advance a program, should you choose to do that. And I think the steps in terms of that process, they put together a traffic and parking commission, I believe, or are contemplating it right now. They might still be contemplating it. I'm also working on a project with a series of students in town here from WPI or Worcester Polytech, who we're hosting on the island, on loading and unloading in town to see if there's any opportunities to make that more efficient. So currently we have loading zones in town. Sometimes they're complied with, sometimes they are not. And then you'll also see that there are locations where people unload that are not signed or marked today. So trying to think about how to make it a little more efficient is the goal. And we'll see what the students come up with. Last time they talked to me, they said they were thinking about recommending things in tranches. So like small things the town could kind of think about to improve loading, unloading, and then some maybe a little bit more labor intensive items we could think about, and then pie in the sky ideas. So it seemed like an interesting way of organizing it, and I'm looking forward to getting their feedback. For BPAC, I am the staff liaison to this group. It's an advisory group. It's not regulatory. Technically, they're appointed by the NP and EDC, and so they report if they provide any kind of correspondence to the NP and EDC. It's a little funky in the sense that a lot of the things that they're interested in are things that the select board would take action on because they're town regulations. So there might be occasions, I don't totally know the logistics of it, but I can foresee occasions where it might be appropriate for them to provide correspondence directly to the town. And then finally, I'm part of the traffic safety work group as it's currently formed today. So this is the group that when there's a request about signage or markings, I help review it. I use the MUTCD frequently for that. So, I mentioned that earlier. If you tune into one of those meetings and there's a request to add a stop sign, for example, I'll go out, I'll take a look at the location. I'll look at what the guidance says in the MUTCD to kind of help me understand if it's appropriate or not. Because again, the idea here is we want to be safe. Aesthetics are important. You sort of have this idea of safety first, aesthetics next, and then sort of personal preferences, because sometimes things are not always cut and dry, right? So you got to kind of work it out. And obviously you have a number of other folks in that group as well, from the police department, the DPW, fire, and we have a volunteer engineer as well on that group who's very familiar with MUTCD. So I help support that. And yeah, that's basically the quick overview of my role. Happy to answer any of the questions that you might have.
I actually have a question, if that's okay, Mr. Chair, for Patrick.
Please go ahead, Holly.
So, with BPAC, am I correct to say that, BPAC reviews any type of proposals where people want to, say, remove a, parking space downtown in lieu of creating a driveway?
That's a good question, Holly. So for an access permit, maybe you could you, sorry, I got to turn my volume up here a little bit. Could you repeat
No, it's
that
fine.
second part here?
So we've had in the past where people will come before, say, the HDC to install a new driveway. And of course, that's just one step of the puzzle. The bylaw requires them to also obviously not only go to the HDC for aesthetics purposes, but also to DPW for what I would call an encroachment permit, but basically for a driveway access permit. But there's been instances in the old historic district specifically where they're creating that in a location where there was already a previously created parking space. And I've been under the impression that BPAC reviews those prior to, say, the select board saying, sure, you can do that. And my understanding, there's a 1 ratio. If you're going to be removing a parking space here downtown, you need to add it somewhere else or something to that effect. And I was just curious if you could elaborate on that.
I probably cannot. That has not come across the charge, at least of this group, as they are currently formed. You know, when we met, we've only met twice since being reconstituted. We'll be meeting again at the end of November here, following the holiday. So we'll post the agenda later this week on that. But the group right now is very interested in two things, based on sort of the direction of the chair and vice chair. And the two things are micromobility and regulating micromobility, as well as the so-called nuisance stop signs. So nuisance, I guess I should probably define both. So we'll start with one, micromobility. This is the idea that you not only have bikes and strollers and walkers on these side paths today, but you also have motorized vehicles like e-bikes or those little, I don't even know what they're called, the little scootery things with the wheel. Yeah. So you have those, people are driving, or I shouldn't say, well, people are using them pretty quickly, right? And based on the terrain, sometimes the visibility, there's some safety concerns. So right now the group is trying to figure out what their role, what the town could do and what their role for that would be. So recommending some kind of potential regulation. Maybe it's the low-hanging fruit, just etiquette signs. Maybe it's putting together some material that could be handed out when people rent, you know, these vehicles from places in town. All of these are options. The state did actually I believe just enacted some legislation to revise their definitions of those micromobility devices. So we're kind of educating ourselves about that in order to help later understand what the town can do. As we understand it right now, you can have a speed limit on a path. The town does have the jurisdiction to do that for its own local paths, but the kind of the challenge is enforcement, right? If you have a rule or a regulation that you can't enforce, people quickly figure that out, and then it kind of calls into question enforcement of other things. So it's a balance, right? We're trying to figure out what the best path forward would be. I'll tell you, as a transportation planner, ideally design is the best path, right? Because rather than having a regulation, people are most compliant with the design, right? If you have a design of a path that encourages people not to travel quickly, and they won't. It's the same for vehicles as well. If you have a big wide turn, people can take a turn really quickly. If you make it sharp, people are going to slow their vehicle down and turn a little bit more slowly. So, you know, reviewing new designs of paths is probably important from a speed perspective. So that's part of it. For the other item, the nuisance stop signs, this is the idea about removing, oh, you might be interested in this, removing stop signs on shared use paths, or I call them side paths, but I think they're in the town, people refer to them as multi-use paths. But any of those words are fine. Removing them at the intersections here, because people don't comply. The idea is to make things comprehensive and are comprehensible for all parties. If you have a stop sign at a shared use path and a bicyclist is coming up to it and they completely ignore it, as they do today, as I've witnessed in the field 100% of the time, the problem is that as a driver, if you're coming up to that intersection and you're approaching it, you see a stop sign and you expect that bicyclist to stop, and they don't. And that creates a potential conflict. So removing those stop signs is important, because it will help set expectations that pedestrians, bicyclists, and other rollers do have the right of way, and you as a vehicle do need to slow down and stop. This gets to that issue that I think kind of has come up a couple times in this conversation, that we don't want to put signage out just willy-nilly for things that people won't comply with, right? So, you know, you have to be careful with how you use signage. It should be effective, and it should have a purpose, and it should be enforceable. So that's part of that conversation. Those are really the two things BPAC is looking at. The item you mentioned, Holly, seems to me like it would be more of traffic safety work group item, but I'd have to defer to people in town who know a little bit more about that. Mickey, I don't know if you have any recollection of stuff that.
Well, that's exactly what we do on one of the things we do on traffic safety work group is to review the private parking spaces in town. And and you're right, if the driveway goes through a public parking space, in other words, you have to eliminate a parking space to put the driveway in. I think the preference is to actually create two off-street parking spaces rather than just one. Because basically all you're doing, if you just give one, you're just privatizing a parking space and the town loses out. So I think we're really looking for a gain of parking when we approve those.
Remember that.
Yes.
And we don't approve them, actually. We just make recommendations. The select board actually does the approval.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I bring that up just because we've had one recently within the last couple of months brought to the HDC, which is right on right next to the Unitarian Church on Orange Street,
Mhm.
where you have a yellow line for fire, so don't park. Plus you have a telephone pole, all these different things in front. And I know, Mickey, you saw this application from HDC's perspective. And it so many different aspects of it that just rears its ugly head, that it's like, well, don't even look at the fact that is this even acceptable from a historic district perspective? What about the safety mechanism? So I just wanted to bring that up. So I'm glad to hear it's traffic safety. I just gotta make sure I remember which acronym it is. Thank you.
So I worked previously in the District of Columbia, and they have one of the most conservative approaches to curb cuts in the nation. Actually, you might be interested. They have a very interesting history of public space, but they're very, very conservative about disruption of public space. And there are a number of reasons. Parking is one of them, but it's also anytime you put a curb cut in, it's a disruption of the existing pedestrian environment. And that's something that they're very, very sensitive about. And I think generally it is a good practice. I mean, everything you have to kind of consider context, but generally it's a good practice to avoid curb cuts if they're not definitely necessary, particularly in an urban walkable downtown that you have, like what you have in Nantucket.
Agreed, 100%.
Patrick, thanks so much for your talk. I looked forward to meeting you and hearing what your projects are. When you were talking about traffic mitigation and sustainability, it just made me think about town and how, especially in the past few years, the traffic that we might see on the busiest August day is something that we're getting pretty much for the whole season now. And we almost get into these gridlock situations of a circle from Milestone to the Rotary out Old South Road to Nobody or Farm Road. And it's just one, stop and go line of traffic. We have another issue around Five Corners in the high school and Sparks Ave in Pleasant Street getting into town. And so they're all, big issues and quality of life issues, safety issues. And it's a scary proposition, even for an adult, let alone a family, with young kids trying to get from where you've rented a bike on Broad Street to the Rotary. So I think that those areas are of the utmost concern for most islanders and visitors alike. I think, as much as NHC can be involved in any way possible, just so that we're not sort of at the end, criticizing, if we can be more part of the process wherever there's an opening for that. And Holly, as our liaison, please, help with the connection of getting in early and participating as designs are created and thought of.
Well, I think that's great. I'm looking forward to the collaboration over the next couple years here. And I think it's an exciting time, right? Nantucket has a lot of open projects. So I think there will be a lot of room for engagement. So I think that's a good thing. And I'm looking forward to working with you all.
Thank you, Patrick.
Nice
Thank
meeting you
you.
all.
So we have about 20 minutes left. I think let's move on to the next item on the agenda, and that would be the annual town meeting articles that would be of concern to the Historical Commission. There are a few articles. One is from Diane Coombs regarding the HDC. And if there are any comments that anyone would like to or has, please feel free to voice them now. My screen just changed.
I put up the article.
Oh, thank you. Commissioners,
Didn't the HDC meet yesterday to discuss this?
They did, and they have not voted
Okay.
or discussed it at all. They ran out of time. They went a half hour over. So,
So I didn't watch it, but I was looking for the recording, but I didn't. I'm sure I'll see it today.
yeah, it should be up, because since it was a Thursday meeting, it's also one of those meetings that are not done by NCTV. So
Oh.
town staff has to upload it, so. I don't know if Fez has done that yet, but I once our meeting has concluded, I will be touching base with the town admin. Yeah,
was anyone there at the meeting besides Holly? And Holly, if you were the only one, you're saying that they ran out of time and didn't discuss it?
correct. Yes, because they were talking about best practices, which I think a lot of people, especially here, will be happy about. For streamlining applications and requirements, and they're actually wanting to go more digital. So there were a lot of discussion of, and they only meet, if they do meet on Thursdays, is an hour and a half. And unfortunately, they didn't go over it. They went to 2:00. I mean,
Right,
2, 3
wasn't
o'clock.
technically, like, the agenda was Diane's letter and not the Warren article itself.
Correct. It was, and I will say this for the record, it was Diane's letter is what was listed on the agenda. But that technically is the Warren article
Yeah.
because it was done prior to the formal submittal for the actual Warren article. But it's the same verbiage that was in there. So essentially that's what it would be. They are not meeting next week due to the holiday. They'll be meeting, their next meeting is the day before your meeting, the 29th. So I would assume it would be discussed then.
And was there any discussion of the Historical Commission?
No.
I think Holly should get a raise.
Thank you.
There are a lot of hats. There are a lot of hats that you're wearing, Holly.
Well, I guess my only question would be on, I think in general, with these different articles, Holly, have people come to you and the other staff members to get your perspective? Because, for instance, I was on the select board meeting, in hearing the commentary, I thought it was really helpful for those who weren't on it, that we did get to hear a lot from the staff about how, their time and things like that, but also, when realistically thinking about how we can improve and make things better, I think we should be ensuring that we leverage the staff who are the ones who have a lot of the knowledge. And like, I know you alluded to something about amending the special act, but maybe perhaps rather than jumping to the idea of whether or not we support or don't support an article, but really talk with the staff to get an understanding of like what the core issues are first. I mean, that's just what, from my corporate background, usually that is a more productive way to find the solution. So perhaps, Holly, maybe you could give us a little of your input on that.
Mr. Chair, through you, yes, I thank you, because that hasn't happened. And that was one of the things that, I'm glad of the discussion really truly at the select board, because it really should be a district-wide review from an outside preservation planning professional that can look at the Nantucket Historic District and how things are handled and how they are run, not just from a advisory board perspective, but also from a staffing perspective. We are a certified local government. There's a lot of different things that are available to us. We've had National Alliance of Preservation Commission training that I had through the NPDC and the planning director's involvement, and the town paid for that. Education is very important, but looking not just jumping to conclusions like this is what we need to do and this is what should be done. Why not seek an outside agency who that's what they do, that's what they are knowledgeable on, to see what would be done, and I would agree with that. But to answer your question short, no, I was not asked about any of that, except for at the select board.
Okay. Thank you. That's all.
Well, if there aren't any other comments about that article, let's go on to the next one that has that is suggesting an addition of the one of the seats on the MP EDC for one of the historical commission members.
Angus, I'm going to suggest that we take this article up when Hillary's present, because she's the one sponsoring it and can give us the best background on it.
I think it would be helpful to have her input and presentation of the article. I agree with that, Mickey. I'm looking at it more as from the perspective of the Nantucket Historical Commission's role in planning on the island, and whether that is something that the commission thinks is a valid or desirable.
Well, I don't think you get any argument from anybody here that I think that we would be we would feel important. It's important enough for us to be on the NPDC, so a representative of this board to be on it. I think we would play a very important role in that regard. So,
That's just what I wanted to get the temperature of the commission. I assume that, and you're assuming that, but
Well,
there's
no,
the rest
I
of the
will.
commission.
No, this is Clement. I think just like you were saying, Angus, to the transportation planning, we like to get in on the beginning, the design part, and not to be making criticisms. Sorry about my dog. Make criticisms when the design has already been done. So this would be certainly a way to get in on the front end of the design part. So I think it would be great. I'm muting the
David or
dog.
Tom?
I agree with both of you guys' suggestion that we wait till Hillary is present and she can make a presentation. So,
But as far as our participation in planning,
as far as our participation in planning is concerned, I definitely think we should be a part of it. On EDC.
thank you. Abby?
I mean, I agree. I just think also I would defer back to making sure we have a holistic understanding of like what the NPEDC mission and role is and where their gaps are. Because, again, if we have advocate, like if Holly, if you're part of that, and we have someone who does take historic preservation, as important part of their role, is that a gap that exists? Again, I just would want to make sure that we have a full understanding. So I would probably similar to my previous comment, like make sure we refer back and talk to all the parties to make sure we understand like what exactly that commission does, who are the people that are on it today, like, you know, is there worthy, because maybe there are more holistic changes to be made. So I think that
Right.
would be just my thought.
Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, I'd like to kind of go a little bit on that. Obviously, preservation planning is near and dear to my heart as a planner and a preservationist, but as a town employee, as a town staff member and plus, I also am a member as a town staff through NPDC. So I actually represent NPDC when it comes to section 106 for the wind farms. I do go to the NPDC meetings when needed, when a voice for preservation is needed. There are aspects of preservation that are brought up that as staff, yes, I am asked on. So, you know, in a way, it is kind of insinuating that there isn't any voice of preservation with NPDC. I'm asked when that need is there. So whether or not there is a need to have it on there as a full-time through the commission is another question. Exactly, what would that do from a regional planning perspective? If there's examples of that elsewhere, other communities within the Commonwealth that have RPAs, that have multiple communities, do they have representatives from a planning board or, excuse me, historical commission would be one of my questions, not reinventing the wheel, so to speak.
Mhm.
That would just be my comment on.
Thanks for that, Holly. It would be great for you to be able to show up full time for them and for the HTC and for, you know, all the other things that you wear hats for, but there's only one of you. And so I feel like you know, a greater preservation and conservation perspective is probably beneficial. And that's just, I think, one of the integral roles that we should be playing is the historical commission in the planning. And it seems a little bit more surgical of when they're asking for input. And I'm grateful that you show up for that, but there might be more there's probably a place for more input and regular input.
And I guess that there's also the distinction of, you know, Holly being there to provide advice and preservation knowledge and all that is, you know, that's critical and very beneficial, but she wouldn't be a voting member. So, you know, a representative from this board would be a voting member of the NPDC, and that's where the real importance is. We know from HSAB, we don't have a vote. You know, we can give good advice, but they don't have to listen to it. But an actual member does have a say in things, so it's different.
That's a good point, Mickey. I'm trying to think who hasn't spoken yet. David or Georgia?
Georgia has a comment, so I'd like her to go first, but I'll comment after.
It's Georgia. I just had one comment. I agree with what Mickey just said, but in addition to giving us an actual vote, but Holly is a town employee, and having an independent voice for preservation, that is, it just seems extremely important to me. So I think that ought to be given. I'm so happy that Holly does what she does, but boy, she's torn in about 5 different directions all the time. And here she does not have a voting voice.
Please go ahead, David.
Yeah, I think it sounds, generally speaking, it sounds like it would be great for the historical commission to have a seat at the table. I'd be interested in understanding more of the process and what that looks like, and kind of just defining that responsibility, which that article well could intend to do. So, you know, I guess I'd like to backburner the conversation to hear from Hillary and then maybe deliberate as a commission afterward.
Well, thank you all. I think we have a consensus that we feel our participation would be beneficial. And we can get more details from Hillary when she's able to be present. But thank you for the feedback on that. If there aren't any other comments, we can go on to the next thing. So I guess we're down to the other business and announcements. We have the annual report, which I was hoping to review in this meeting, but I think that well, it's just not ready yet. So it'll probably be our December meeting that it would be, if it's ready before then, that would be great. Otherwise, it would be the December 16th meeting that we would review that before submitting it to the town.
Yes, can you share the draft when you have it?
Well, that's the plan. Yes.
Okay,
Of course.
great, thank you.
And then I don't know if there are any updates as far as Brant Point Light and Great Point Light. Holly, did you
Holly
have
has an
any
update.
outreach to the Coast Guard?
So right before I was planning on reaching out, they reached out to me.
Oh, that's great.
So, they, right now, they want to have a meeting. It sounds like they have some plans as far as, this is mostly for Brant Point, but of course that will bring the conversation broadly, I believe. We had one scheduled, they canceled it, then we had a new one scheduled, and then they canceled again. So, I'm hopeful that when we finally get to, have a discussion, I'll have something to report back to the commission, but I was very pleased, and I thank them for reaching out because it was almost as if they had ESP.
So the
That's
good news
wonderful.
is the lines of communication are open.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Yeah.
Well,
So very
that's
happy
good
about
news.
Yeah, that's great.
Wow, we've actually gotten to the end of our agenda. When does that happen before 12:04?
Amazing.
I move we adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, well, I'll go through the commissioners. David,
Aye.
Abby,
Hi.
Clement,
Aye.
Nikki,
Hi.
Tom,
Aye.
Georgia, did I get you?
I'm the seconder.
Thank you. I think that's everybody, and I as well. So we are adjourned. Have a lovely
you.
Thanksgiving, everyone, and
One
thank you
other
for your
thing I'd like
time.
to vote. When is the next meeting?
The
16th.
30th at 1 o'clock is our
30th.
special meeting, and then our regular meeting will be the 16th at 10.
16th, that's what I mean.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
30th and the 16th.
30th and the 16th, yep.
It seems pretty early for the third Friday.